preparing for tonight, I was led to two stories, actually, and we're going to be looking at both stories. These are two stories when we find Jesus in a boat with the disciples in the middle of a storm. Okay? Let's get into it. Quick recap first, all right? So Jesus' ministry starts after he gets baptized by his cousin John, and then he goes about teaching people about God, about how God wants them to live, and then performing all kinds of incredible miracles, and mostly healing people, right? All the while, he has this close group of mates, these guys who walk with him every step of the way. And the way, that's exactly what he's doing. He's showing them the way that he wants them to live. He's teaching people, he's healing people, and he's showing them that this is what he wants them to do, how he wants them to live. He said, right, famously, that he is the way, the truth, and the life. And the way has to come first. He is the way to the Father, right? And his life is the example that we, as disciples of Jesus, are to follow. And then we get to Matthew 8. So I'll grab that first passage. Jesus has been teaching and healing people, and they get into a boat and they set out across a lake. Let's read this. This is Matthew 8, 23 to 27. Then he, that's Jesus, got into the boat, and his disciples followed him. Suddenly a furious storm came upon the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying, "Lord, save us. We're going to drown." He replied, "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" Then he got up. He rebuked the wind and the waves, and it was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked, "What kind of man is this? Even the winds and waves obey him." So they continue on their way from there. Jesus delivers a man of a legion of demons, and he goes on teaching and healing, right? Performing all kinds of miracles. And then the disciples get to see one of the most incredible miracles, I think, when Jesus takes one meal and feeds 5,000 men and their families, right? With enough left over to fill 12 baskets full of food, right? This is incredible. And then again, we get episode 2 of Jesus in the boat with the disciples, right? This one's Matthew 14, 22 to 33. Immediately, right? We're getting somewhere. Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." See, Jesus, with his disciples, he's showing them the way that they ought to live. He's putting on display what it looks like for a person to be surrendered to the Father and empowered by the Spirit. And as we can see here, even Jesus encounters storms in his life. when I was in film school, a storm rolling up in a scene, like you'd write your script, and a storm rolling up on the horizon is like metaphor, poetic speak for there's trouble coming, right? And truth is, Jesus faced a lot of storms in his life, a lot more trouble, worse than this stuff, right? He was heavily persecuted by his people, always under attack from the Pharisees and from all sorts. Even his own family didn't really understand until after he rose from the dead. And in the end, he was even willing to endure hell itself for you and I. Incredible. Jesus, the perfect Son of God, faced his fair share of storms. How is it that we can think sometimes that we shouldn't have to? We shouldn't have to face trials and hardship, hard things, right? One of the hardest seasons for Belle and I in our lives was that first couple of years of the pandemic. We had, a lot of you guys are familiar with this story, but we had moved to a new village, right, with plans of connecting into community and establishing a faith community over what would probably be a long haul, right? Years and years of just pouring into a place, pouring into people. We moved in, and then a few months later, the world shut down, right? We had all these plans to for our own mental health's sake, kind of get out of town a little bit and travel and have people connect with us, and lots of really good ideas and plans because we knew it was already going to be isolating enough. But then COVID happened and all of that went out the window. And we had 2 hard years of really hard isolation. And by the end of that, we were not okay. We were really burnt out. And we almost threw in the towel. We almost said, look, that's enough of all of that. That's enough of pouring our life out. And for what? Like, what was that? 2 years it felt like 2 years wasted, right? But we crash landed in Shanghai, and God, by his grace, helped us pick up some of those pieces, and we've kept going. See, Jesus doesn't promise that we won't face storms in our lives. He doesn't promise that we won't face hard things. We won't have to go through hard things. His promise is that he will be with us in it, in the storm. I think it's interesting that in the first story, the disciples follow Jesus into the boat. And this is after spending time with him, seeing who he is and what he can do, right? Even being sent out on their own in his authority, right, to go and preach and teach and even heal the sick. And then in the second passage, Jesus sends them out ahead of him. Quick question. Did Jesus leave them to go it alone? Is that what he did? Is that what we're seeing here in this passage? Jesus is like, all right, I need some space. All right, I need some me time. Go. You guys have got this, right? I don't think so. See, in Mark's account of this same story, I don't have it up. You'll have to trust me. It says that Jesus saw them straining against the oars. Right? He saw them out on the lake straining against the wind. He had sent them on, but not without him. He was still watching over them. He had, in fact, sent them on in his authority, as he'd done before. He sees them in their struggle. And what does he do? Right? He sees their storm. What does he do? Oh, it's a nice day for a stroll. Right? He goes for a walk. He goes and meets them where they are. So he walks out on the water in the middle of their storm, right? This storm that was humbling even these experienced fishermen. Again, the disciples' response is fear and panic. They see him coming. I mean, I don't blame them. It's a ghost. Like, what box do you put that in? That vision. On a storm, you're exhausted, and then you see a dude walking out on the water. But Peter, in this moment, this is a really cool moment, right? Remember, Peter was there the first time they were in a storm with Jesus. He was one of the disciples who's shaking Jesus awake, going, Jesus, we're going to die. Like, aren't you afraid with us? Come on. And now, this time, after recognizing Jesus, he calls out, Lord, if it is you, tell me to come to you on the water. I would have loved to see the look on Jesus' face in that moment. See, in the first storm, he was disappointed in their lack of faith. It's like, guys, aren't you getting it yet? Aren't you seeing it yet? You don't have to be afraid. I'm with you, but I'm actually sending you in my authority too. They'd already been through so much with him, and then in this moment, Peter shows this little sprout of faith. I can imagine that Jesus would have been so incredibly proud of Peter in that moment. And he says, come walk on the water with me. See, we see 5,000 plus hungry people with one meal to share, and we think a riot is going to happen, right? Jesus sees the same situation, and he sees an opportunity to glorify God, an opportunity to trust God and glorify him. So Peter calls out, and Jesus calls him out onto the water. And then for a brief moment, Peter does what I think probably no one in the physical at least has done ever. Peter walks on the water with Jesus in the middle of a storm. So what does your storm look like? We all face hardship in life. We all face really hard stuff. And if you haven't yet, maybe you're just too young, right? Because it'll come. That's part and parcel of life here in this world, that we face really hard stuff. And as much as we try to avoid it, as much as we minimize it or deny it, it's a part of life. And the thing is, Jesus doesn't minimize our pain. He doesn't try to avoid suffering. The beautiful thing that differentiates Jesus from every other religious structure or every other faith is that Jesus says, no, I'm going to enter into your suffering. I'm going to partake of your suffering and come and be with you in it. So what does your storm look like right now or in the past? Another wonderful thing about Jesus is that even when we fall, even when we fail, he's right there to pick us up again. He's not going to let you drown. His word says, it's a promise, I will never leave you nor forsake you. That is a promise. And God would rather die than let that promise be broken. And guess what? It's exactly what he did. He died for you and for me. He was willing to sacrifice everything. He was willing to endure so much so that we could have a way back to the Father, right? Here's a tough question. In the light of that, what then are we willing to sacrifice? What hardship are we willing to endure so that some might be saved, so that God might be glorified? James writes in his letter to a heavily persecuted church, he says, Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. So I still don't fully understand why God took us through what we realize now was a wilderness, those first 2 years of COVID. Still don't fully understand, but I've chosen to say to God, God, you are worth it. You are worth it. You are worth that little bit of suffering that we went through, that hardship. You are worth it. And James says right here, he shows us a little picture of why. What's the purpose behind this? All right. For us, we know that wasn't a punishment. That season wasn't a punishment. It wasn't a lesson that we needed to learn. That suffering is a tool that God uses to grow us up, to mature us. And even Jesus went through it too. I continue to wrestle with the nature of suffering, with this idea, because I've had a great life. I have a really good life, really good childhood, great family life. I haven't had to endure a lot of real suffering. But as I've grown up a little bit, and I see how some people do suffer, and I've suffered a little myself, I've had to start to wrestle with the nature of suffering, right? What does God think about suffering? I'm so eager to avoid suffering, right? Many of my prayers as a young guy, as a kid, were, God bless me, God make it easy for me, right? And what I think I've started to, even just a little bit in part, started to understand is that God is actually far more concerned with growing us up, maturing us into the image of Jesus than giving us a cushy life. So what does your storm look like? And then the next question you need to ask is, where is Jesus in your storm? Because he has not abandoned you. See, in the first storm, the disciples' response is fear, naturally, but Jesus is asleep. He's so unfazed by the storm that he is asleep. And then in the second storm, right, we find Jesus outside the boat. This is crazy, right? This is a ridiculous place to be. The boat is like, this is safety, this is security, this is the last piece of security I have. Why would I go out there, right? So I want to ask you, where is Jesus in your storm? Is Jesus asleep at the back of the boat, inviting you to come and enter into his rest? To find peace in him? Or maybe Jesus' invitation to you is to come take a leap of faith. Step out from that thing that you're holding on to. And come and trust in me. Be with me. Come and allow me to change your perspective of the storm. See it how I see it. See, if we allow the storm to pull our gaze off of Jesus, what the storm does is it fills us with fear. The troubles of life, if we will focus our eyes on those things, if we will listen and watch, it fills us with fear, right? Anxiety, depression. But if we will hold our gaze on Jesus, even in the midst of hardship, even in the midst of the storm, he will give us peace. It's that peace that surpasses understanding. What that means is you have peace even when you should be falling to pieces. You have peace, you have joy, even when there's no reason to be happy. This is what Jesus is offering us. Not that he will solve all of our problems and erase all of our pain. That will come one day. But right now, in the middle of the storm, what Jesus is offering us is peace, his rest. See, if we'll hold our gaze on Jesus, he will fill us with joy, with peace, with boldness, and with love. And it's so critical that we do as Jesus did right here in this passage. The secret to how he was able to live this life is right here in this passage. Can we go back to the second half of Matthew 14? Yeah. What does he do? Hang on. Where is it? No, sorry, the first part. My bad. Okay, he dismissed the crowd. Verse 23, after he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. This is Jesus, right? Remember, he's fully man. Yes, he's fully God, but he's fully man. He needs to be dependent on God, empowered by the Holy Spirit. Everything he did in his life, all the miracles, right? All the authority he spoke with, he didn't do it in his own strength. He didn't do it by his own authority. He did it by the authority and by the power of the one who sent him, okay? So this is Jesus in this moment showing us what he's inviting us to do. This is what he practiced himself. He went away and he spent time with God. Some people call this the secret place, right? Psalm 91 says, those who dwell in the secret place, right? And then it goes on to list all the benefits for those who will find their refuge, find their rest in him, in God. Jesus was so incredibly busy. He had people pulling on him everywhere he went. It was critical, so critical, even for him to spend time with the Father, spend time with God, praying, right? And that can look a lot of different ways. For me, I'm still not really great at this. I'm going to be totally honest. But for me, one of the things I've come to love, even though I really didn't like it early on, sometimes I guess you could call it a little bit of an insomnia. I'll wake up really early in the morning, like 3 o'clock or something, and I can't get back to sleep. So I figured, what am I doing lying here for like an hour in bed? I'll just go and find a spot in the dark and just hang out with God for a bit. And those times, I'm telling you, have been some of the most incredible times with God in the quiet, right? Before the world wakes up. And it really, like I said, he's worth it. It's been worth losing that little bit of sleep. And I want to do it more. I really don't do it enough. And Jesus is showing us here, this is the key. This is the secret sauce to the walk with Jesus. So if you're looking for peace in the middle of a storm, if you're looking for even answers, it's another tricky one, because I've come to understand that God won't always give us answers for us going through that isolating season. We didn't get all the answers. We didn't have all of our doubts dealt with. But what we did get was peace. What we did get is a return of joy just from being with him. So maybe it would be cool tonight if we spend a little bit of time. If this is something that's resonated with you, if this is a time in your life where you're facing some really hard stuff, I'd like us to take some time and find Jesus in the storm. Ask Jesus, where are you right now? Show me where you are. And if you're struggling with that too, I'd love for you to get prayer too. There are a few people around who can pray with you. So please, if you're, can we do that, guys? Can we have a couple of people to pray with people? If you're, if you would like prayer, come up and see one of the guys, or myself. I'd love to pray for you. But let me encourage you guys. Life is tough. Sometimes, I'm more of an optimist. I say life is awesome. Life is so wonderful. But sometimes life is really tough. We've got to face some really tough stuff. And Jesus' heart for you in that moment is to be close to you. His invitation is, come and be with me. Come and find peace in me. So can we do that right now? Let's all, take a little bit of time. Find Jesus wherever you are. Let's be still, right, before him and ask him, where are you, God? Where are you, Jesus, for me right now?